Hey everybody, uh, we're back for the second episode.
We're
Oddly
back
enough,
for round two.
yeah, one of the I was thinking about certain particulars about this comic, and now that we've hit it, I think we need to start off the bat with just talking about uh the artists and the writers that are now on the comic, because now that we've hit 14, we can now start talking about this very particularly.
And we'll talk about him lots. A
Yeah,
lot.
as it goes on, but like I think talking about him in particular should be the final note that we hit on for this.
Him as if he's a specter who will appear if you say his name 3 times in the mirror.
Okay, so oddly enough, let me just pull up my notes here. Uh, because one of the things that is pretty neat about this series is that it goes from writer to writer as the series goes on. And I think one of the neat aspects about the series really does start to hit home at around this point. So we're actually going to skip all the way to uh, issue 10. And we're going to talk about this in particular because this is the first time that we get a new writer on board. So in issue 10, to skip ahead, we have
You're sure
two
it's issue 10?
yes, particular okay, issue 9 is technically when he gets introduced. But issue 10 is when it's all the new writer, who is Angelo De Caesar. And
Mm-hmm.
Angelo De Caesar is a very interesting writer. Now that I kind of look at like what he's made. Uh and you notice something very particular when Antoine starts talking, because he starts giving him the accent from the show. And I
Yeah.
instantly picked up on it. And one of the really neat things about Antoine is that he's French. And this might not seem.
He's he's extremely French coded is what he is. And it's played for laughs a lot, and then it's played for actual like storytelling in many of the better issues he's in.
So yeah, issue 10. Uh so two things happen. One is you get the storyline with the Nerbs, which are this
I always forget that this because we see them again, but
yeah,
we're not going to see them for a very long time.
but this feels like a one-off character that would show up in Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, which is where Scratch and Grounder come from. It's where a lot of this comic's mannerisms come from, and honestly, it's where the vibe of classic Sonic as a comic series comes from. And to see the nerves in this comic made me go, no, this in particular is a Sonic comic. As this episode 10, the reason why I wanted to bring it up is the first and probably the only in all of classic Sonic I'm gonna give a gold, and it's mostly
I
and
I see it. I don't agree, but I see it. I see where you're coming from with that.
because when I think about like classic Sonic, and when I mean that, I mean everything leading up to Mecha Madness, is that we have this situation where all of these characters feel like themselves. And you could tell that, and you could feel that De Caesar really understands these characters to an extent that maybe not even Gallagher really knew, and definitely Ken Penders doesn't. But when you get to something like Antoine in the balloon for the second story, and
Oh, I loved that one. That one was fun. Yeah,
just
it's a silver type fun, but it's a good fun comic.
yeah, it's like that B side is really fascinating because I can hear the characters from Sat AM through this writing. And I'm like, perfect. This is really what I wanted in this story, and it's pretty great. Now, I think you said that you didn't give anything a silver,
Now,
above a
nothing,
silver in any
just
of this.
because they've got storylines now does not make a comic a gold.
Yes, but
Gold means a little bit more to me.
yeah, but I feel like the vibe of this comic at least was where I wanted classic Sonic to be at.
Yeah.
But now that we've talked about that, we need to actually go back a little bit to issue
We're not
7.
gonna talk about the turtles yet?
Uh,
And their one panel cameo, or are we gonna save that?
it is really funny how there is a Ninja Turtles cameo right there, and it's really funny how Sonic and the voice of Sonic were in the same room together. Very funny. Because if you don't know, the movie voice for Sonic is also Leonardo right now in the
Uh-huh.
Ninja Turtles. So it's very
Hey,
funny to see anything revolving those two properties together in the same room.
hey, hey, he is on a mission to play every single blue character from his childhood, and I wish him the best of luck.
Uh, so we might as well go backwards now, since we've talked about issue 10 in particular, because now we have to talk about Mike Gallagher's style of writing, like a little bit better. So what do you have to say about issue 7?
Issue 7? I think issue 7 is where the people on the staff for this comic are starting to understand the characters, and they're starting, well, because I think Eggman and Sonic are really basic characters, and they've always stayed really basic. But, as per this comic, Sonic has a whole cavalcade of, like, friends that hang out with him. And they've been really one note lately, which is why kind of it befits these earlier issues to really speed up with some of these issues.
Yeah,
I
because
think this comic is all right. It has an awkward moment with the B story.
but
But I blame that for Eggman's incompetence less so than anything else.
I had no notes.
Yeah.
Like I went through this whole thing and I couldn't think of a single thing to write down. It is probably the most like bare bones bronze I'm giving to this whole set of comics that we're talking about right now. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons why is because Mike Gallagher has a way of writing comedy that's pretty good. Like for instance, I like
Mhm.
the ending of the B-side where Sally gets
Oh
back
yeah.
from whatever she was doing, and she's like still in costume and stuff, and she just goes, "Oh Sonic, I like you so much." Smacks the stick above his
The
head,
wand
just walks off,
upside his head.
angrily,
Uh-huh.
and he's just like, "I don't know what I did wrong," and it's like this is the type of comedy that I expect from the Sonic comic, and comparing it to the way that DeCesar writes characters and the way that Gallagher writes comedy, I feel like that the second that they get right in between each other is when you start getting that like perfect sweet spot. Because
Yeah.
Gallagher like got his start on like maybe not Golden Age but Silver Age Marvel, which that was the whole
Yeah.
vibe. And to feel that
Hmm.
sort of like Silver Age comic to be at the beginning of Sonic's run really does fit for him.
Yeah, Silver Age superhero comics are kind of marked by their silly primacy, and their slapstick, comedy-esque, um, kind of attitude towards the characters and the plot.
So you gave this one
And
a
that's
bronze as well?
where, yeah, the more I think about this is because this comic, with some of these comics, I could pick out individual, like, issues or, like, a range of issues. If you showed me, like, these stories and had me guess, I wouldn't be able to guess. And
Uh,
I have guessed correctly on comics before.
that actually leads into issue 8.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
issue 8 is the most forgettable comic I have ever read. Uh, I literally forgot this comic
Oh,
existed.
yeah. I remembered it happened. I thought this was in, like, the 20s for the issue number. It kind of like, oh yeah, they did do this.
And the
Where
only
they where they do have discount Bodega Batman and Bodega Shazam fight Sonic.
and it's like, okay, here's the spawn mower. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of funny. And then it's like uh Captain Marvel, and then people go, which Captain Marvel's like, Shazam. Oh, okay. I was like, and then it's like,
And then
here
the Steve
comes
Urkelbot too.
and then the Steve Urkel bot, which is very funny, but it's like, man, I have
It's
no
not
memory of this
fun.
besides the Spawn bot, which the second I saw, I went,
Yeah, the
oh, it's that
Spawn one.
guy.
Yeah. This Jaleel, like, two panel section is only funny if you know voice actors. And it just flies over your head if you don't.
And then the B side is Sonic and the rest of the Freedom Fighters get turned small so they could I don't
While
know.
trying while trying to remember this, despite the fact that I read this over again this morning, this entire branch, I forgot this one was for this issue.
Yeah, and then it's
That's
like,
how um that's how inconsequential some of these stories are for it.
and
And maybe it's just that we have higher expectations of these comics because we know where they're going to go in the future. Where it's
yeah,
basically Game of Thrones with furries in some of these, like, in some of these story arcs.
but episode 8 is so forgettable that it might actually end up contending with Stone at some point, but it's not bad. It's just
It's a low
so,
bronze. It's not offensive like one of the story issues will come across.
yeah. And so I was like, and you could just tell how we're just like speeding through this. But honestly, I think issue 9 might actually be like one of my favorite like classic Sonic stories.
Well, it's
Which
because this character's cool. And they didn't use him enough because they got a better version of him from the game.
so to explain this story, this was one of Mike Gallagher's last like full stories before other writers started taking over. And the idea of Pseudo Sonic was he create is Robotnik creates a bot that will trick whoever is guarding the entrance of Knothole to let him in, and then they could use the GPS locator to find out where he is. There is no battle with him. There's nothing interesting that happens between Sonic and Pseudo Sonic. In fact, like Sonic is having like anaphylactic shock sitting in the background for like 80% of this story.
Oh yeah.
And Betty Butterfly is such an AO Sith character that like it like screamed out at me. I'm like, wait, has this character come up before? Like, who is this person? Um, like it's just not interesting.
Yeah.
But
Like the the villain du jour of the month for this issue is way more interesting than the story he's put in.
Yeah, but it's not really about like it's the concept of the A side story that was neat, and the actual character writing of the B side story that I find neat because you have Gallagher and you have DeCesar in the same issue. So now you could kind of look at both of their story writing potentials side by side.
What
You have Mike
what I
Gallagher
do
that
want to bring
has
up
yeah.
is this pseudosonic story is cool because it's kind of a reverse of all the other issues we've seen so far where it's not Sonic saving the day, it's Sonic's friends saving him. And you know me, I'm
Hmm.
always down for that. I'm always down for the hero being saved by his friends.
One of the but yeah, it's like and then you get to the B-side story. The B-side story is that as Sonic is running along, he meets a needle bird, which is this half
Yeah.
porcupine, half bird creature. And Sally is like, we're not bringing this thing in because the last time we had like other creatures in, they turned out to be a robot or they have a tracking device or was an entire plane.
The straight up plane, the deer bombardier was so good. I was like, oh yeah, the plane deer. How could I forget about the roboticized plane deer?
And then like Sonic is like, okay, I'm gonna find a good spot to put this bird since you don't want it around. And he looks over and Sally is being grabbed by a tree. And Robotnik says, I'm gonna bring her back personally. It'll be tremendous of a triumph. And then Sniffler's like,
And then they
that
get
is a
all
very
of the
clever.
puns done
Yeah, and then
for the rest of the whole issue so that they don't need to do them anymore because the entire issue would be nothing but tree puns.
which it still is because like on the next page, Sonic is like, wait, where is it? Why do I feel like I'm being stalked? And the editor was like, no, that's a corn pun. Ah, you missed up.
Doesn't count.
And then it's like, okay, very easy to take this thing out. And then the bird comes in to help, which is the classic like Sonic comic storyline where it's like, okay, villain is good guy gets kidnapped, hero saves the good guy, the villain shows up to do one last attack. The the aiding factor that is the one-off for this issue comes in for the clutch, which again we're gonna see in a later issue
Huh.
in this
Bird
batch,
pun.
is gonna be this exact same storyline. And it's funny because like because you look at this whole thing and then you go, "Yep, that's a classic storyline." But it's not just a classic storyline; it's fun. It's a very fun
Mm-hmm.
story that I was like smiling halfway through, and I'm like, ah, there we go. And honestly, like I gave this one a silver, and
Yeah.
only after the last, uh, only after like issue 10 that I went back and went, oh, this is written by this is written by DeCesar. Of course it is. It was like, and I realized I like Gallagher's stories, but I'm really liking DeCesar's way of writing these characters. There was this foreknowledge that DeCesar brings to the table that is fundamentally better, and it's why I gave issue 10 a gold is just because
Mm-hmm.
I felt like that I have to like elevate this type of story because I like this type of story.
Yeah. It's a good story.
What'd you give issue 9?
Issue 9.
Yeah.
You know, because I just have to think about what happened in issue 9, it's a bronze. And I'm gonna leave it at that. I was like, oh. Oh, wait, no. I'm thinking of the wrong one. That's how much 8 messed with my brain. Is I definitely give 9 a silver as well.
Okay.
8 I gave a bronze. That's how much 8 messed with my brain. I'm confusing it for other issues in the lot.
Okay, so issue 11. I need to hear your opinion on a very certain panel that is in issue 11.
Okay.
Okay?
Of
So, on
which one? Which panel? Because there's many panels I would like to talk about.
so in
Because we see, let me double check that he's actually in this one. Because I don't want to give credit. Oh, yeah, here he is. KP is making his debut in the Sonic comics.
so there is a particular panel in this story in the B-side storyline. Well, technically it's a C-side storyline where I know this isn't the artist's fault, but I really do feel like that the second Ken Penders touches something, you could feel it. So there is a
Yeah.
page
Oh,
in
you could
the
definitely feel it in the first two stories. This one, this story feels like something they got handed off the desk because there wasn't enough goofs and gaffs in the first two that they made them put all the jokes in the third one.
yeah,
And that's what I'm gonna put it as.
the seaside story is literally Sonic as a chili dog, and he walks in, and Sally Acorn is an ice cream cone, and she has
It's
a
a
tape
vanilla ice cream cone.
showing a burger Dr. Robotnik about to throw a Tails, who was a bunch of French fries, into a vat of Crisco oil.
I call foul because the monkey bot here isn't also a food.
Yeah, but
And
she
I
has
call
the
foul
banana.
on that.
But he has the
Yeah, but it's
banana.
not good enough. It's not good enough. He need everyone else is a food. He needs to be a food.
And there is one panel in the seaside in which Sonic is like, "Well, now I gotta go save Tails," and it's just Sonic and Sally in this panel, and Sally does this incredibly demure hands to the mouth, and she goes, "Oh, I hope you're gonna be all right," and a switch triggered in my head and went, "Oh right, Chempenders can't write women. Oh no,
Oh no.
oh
He gets
no."
even worse. He gets even worse the more girls he has to write for.
And I had to double
Because
check.
there are moments in the same comic where Julie and Sally sound and write the exact same.
Yeah, and okay, so the main story.
Birdtropolis is quite good, and they do deserve points for only that.
So, this entire issue was written by two people, and I want to say it's because it's Ken Penders, but he's actually the second writing credit. But I
So
will,
he's clearly the assistant
yeah, he's the
to the
assistant.
writing team. So we can't blame it all on him. Because
Yeah,
definitely the first two stories are higher quality. Well, no, the first story is higher quality than the last two are.
so you
And
have
I think that that's where they put all the brain juice in.
so you have Mike Kinterovich and you have uh, Ken Penders,
Yeah.
and later into the set of comics, the person doing the inks, Art Mullaney, takes over for Dave Manick, who then goes to basically working on the covers most of the time. And when Art Mullaney takes over for the writing, for the drawing, you instantly notice it because they don't really know how to draw Sally. They're a little bit weird with it. Several of the panels of Sally makes her head a little too big. Uh, it's very weird. I might bring it up at some other point, but I'm not really down with Art Mullaney's like style of drawing several of the characters. It looks too simplistic, and the characters take up
Well,
too much of the panels a lot of the time. I mean, you could tell that Dave Manick worked on Marvel. Like he has interesting like panel layouts, and it's not just like one for one all the time. But
Yeah.
like
It's it could also be an experience as well, because typically, well, how I understand it goes is you start doing stuff for other people, and then you start going into the inks, and then you go into the pencils, and then you start working on entire panel layout. So this might just be we have someone who's experienced versus someone who's not as experienced in the style.
so the storyline of issue 11 is that Sonic wants to try to find something. I can't remember the exact wording.
He's
He
he's well, he's looking for a shortcut
right, he's trying to find a shortcut
to
between
Robotropolis because there's a massive moat of pollution muck,
and in the
and
games.
this dude can't swim.
Yeah, and in the games, the idea is that when you finish a level, you will then hit a warp zone that will then take you to the next level. This comes up in the games sometimes, but it actually is showcased in one of the TV series. I can't remember which one it did it in. But
Well,
on the way through the
it was definitely Adventures that did that.
on
I'm
his way through the
I need
cosmic
to rewatch
yeah,
Sat AM if they did it too.
on his way through the cosmic interstate, he accidentally takes a left turn where he shouldn't have and ended up in the mirror dimension, in which all character allegiances and all character stats are flipped. This is going to come very important later. But when he meets the evil version of Sonic, the evil Sonic, which for clarity we are just going to call him the name that they eventually give him later, because it's
Scourge,
his name
because
is
I'm gonna mess
Scourge.
up.
Uh,
I'm gonna mess. Oh, we have to talk about the good doctor too, who
yeah,
is in my heart. He's a darling, and I hope nothing bad happens to him in future issues.
yeah, and
Right,
he,
Scourge?
uh, Scourge pulls out a whiteboard and he quickly jots down exactly what he is trying to explain. He
You
is
definitely know he's the opposite because Sonic would not bother to explain a thing.
yeah, he's like, we are here, your universe is over there.
Meaning
When
he's tried to do this. He's tried to go to other versions
when you
of
flipped
himself
on the
before.
axis, everything becomes reversed. Welcome to the reverse universe, where the freedom fighters fight against freedom. And Dr. Robotnik is left to pick up the pieces instead. And it's like, okay, this actually makes a little bit of sense. But you also kind of realize the way that Scourge is talking. He's talking with a level of fast-witted intelligence that is just
And
not Sonic.
disdain as well.
And you start realizing, oh, it's not just reversed, it's reflected. Everything in this universe is a reflection to everything. And I honestly think one of the uh, biggest aspects about this literally just comes down to the fact that they wanted to get a very clear cut, okay, this is an evil Sonic. But other but as the storyline goes on, you start realizing that the mirror reflection is a lot more intense than probably Ken expected when he first wrote this storyline.
Well,
And
yeah, because you have to mirror flip someone who is impulsive and crass. And how do you mirror flip a good guy who is impulsive and crass?
you make
You
someone that
make him a
plans too far ahead.
you make him a Machiavellian schemer, which is what Scourge is. And he really doesn't have enough panels to shine.
Anyway,
But as with everything, there's one constant. Sonics are way too egotistical for their own good.
so
And
I
it's the only thing they have in common.
I gave this a silver. Did you want to give
This is a
this?
very high silver.
Yeah.
For the rest of the issues, it brings it down. But if we were just talking about this issue, it's a this like a story, it's a high silver. It gets bumped down to a normal silver because of the stuff we were talking about with the A and the B's, without the B and the C storyline. The C storyline is just everyone's tied tied up. There's a maze mini game for the kids, and Sally makes heart eyes at her boyfriend, and that's pretty much the entirety of the B-side story plot.
Okay. So now we're at issue 12. And one of the things that I instantly noticed about issue 12, let me see if I have it in my notes. Okay. So issue 12 is one of the best ways to kind of like put this. If we were to refer to the A side of issue 10 as a Ken Penders issue, the B side storyline, which is uh the the one with the Eagle family, that one is.
This is this reeks of of Penders in the best ways.
But you could
This is this is Pender's doing actually what he's really good at, which is secondary side characters that are not Sonic.
yeah, it was like
Like, Snively is well written, the Eagle is well written, Eggman's well written, and Sonic is there.
you could definitely see that there was a level of empathy for these characters instantly that you could kind of get behind, and it's pretty neat. Uh, I'm going to at
Like, he's got a
least,
family and kids.
yeah, I will actually credit this with Kenterovich instead of Ken Penders because I honestly think that one of the okay, no, I can't do that just yet. I'm gonna give
Yeah,
this to Ken Penders because we actually
yeah.
know his storyline, but I
I know too much about how he writes characters, and like I can see certain plots of this being, I'm gonna mispronounce his name if I'm not staring at it, Kinterovich.
yeah,
I see his work in this, and it is disingenuous not to credit him as well. But these character designs and this character makeup is definitely panders,
I
especially with Snively.
I did like the line of get my Trilerian hat. And I'm like, what the heck is that? And then I saw him coming up in Lederhosen and with a ram robot. I'm like, oh my gosh. And it was like, it made me laugh. And I'm like, you know
Yeah,
what?
that was a good one.
It's like, okay.
Yeah, he gets that one.
Now,
It's like, I'm going up into the mountains. I must be as silly and ridiculous as humanly possible.
so, the A
But
side
he
storyline.
dressed very warm. So jokes on who? Because a guy looks warm and he looks well dressed.
So the A side storyline, meanwhile, is is Gallagher doing a storyline where Robotnik sends him into the past,
Uh
and
huh.
you meet Son the Bog Hog, who
We'll
fights
see a
I
version of him again, I assure you.
and
Because I definitely remember a prehistoric plotline thing.
there's this scene where Ivo Robotnik is is trying to launch a
Oh,
catapult to
it
hit
takes me out
a rock.
every with the multiple hats. I love it so much. You can tell he lives alone
And
and
I
he
love how
can't build robots yet and he desperately wants
he
to.
throws both hats and it goes, "This will be a lot more fun when I invent robotic slaves in 4,000 centuries."
It's pretty good. And unfortunately, it sets a timeline that they will actually adhere to.
yeah, and it's like there's this whole thing where it's like, okay, so Sonic meets the prehistoric freedom fighters. I believe they actually retcon this into being in the negative positive dimension this is going to make absolutely no sense if you've never seen the layout of the multiverse, but I think it's in the
Yeah.
negative positive dimension
Yeah.
where,
Well, because they're good guys.
yeah,
They're good guys trying their best, which puts them in the positive dimension. However, there's no tech, so that's still
but
what is that?
it's
That is in the fourth quadrant, I believe.
in the upper left, yeah, because evil Sonic lives in the negative dimension, and stuff that are thematic is the negative
Forgot how
positive dimension.
nonsense some of these story plots are.
And
It's like, oh
storylines where
yeah,
Sonic
that's how that
fails
works.
is in the positive negative is is in the positive negative dimension. The, it makes absolutely no sense to explain it that way because I haven't read the Sonic comic in so long to remember the explanation that I'm just going off the top of my head.
Yeah. Pretty much the only thing you need to remember from those comics is the grid, and that's it.
Yeah. And so we have the third storyline, which honestly is just the same storyline again, where it's if I remember correctly, this is
Yeah, it's
directly
this.
pulled from an episode. I could be
Yeah,
wrong though, where it's
we. This is also a character we see again in future storylines.
yeah, Sonic meets a Lynx who, whenever he's around, the most unlikely thing that will happen does, which
Larry the
usually
Jinx Lynx,
yeah, which usually ends up with characters getting injured, uh, plans going
except for
awry.
Sonic, for the
Yeah,
most part.
and so you have thing, and so the Lynx is like, okay, I guess I'll just turn myself in to like uh get out of your hair, and then the robots start falling apart, and shots can never land, and Robotnik's dragster, not sure where he got that, but okay,
He
crap,
obviously built that. He
yeah,
obviously built that in like a month, and he obviously put love into that. And he was about to use that to parade the freedom fighters through the streets.
and
It
it
just gets wrecked.
yeah loses control and he like crashes it, and I'm like, this issue is one of the best showcases of the four different writing styles that we will see. Technically three, but we see all four writers in the same comic. And I give this one a silver. It's pretty enjoyable.
Yeah. It's definitely a silver. Also, the last panel of Larry beating Rotor constantly in chess reminded me of the meme of the chess grandmaster and the kid who eats the chess pieces.
Yeah.
Larry is just full on devouring chess pieces in front of him.
Okay. This is where we get to start talking about Mike Kantarovich's story writing. I know this is Mike Kantarovich in issue 14 for a very certain thing. Did you catch it? And
It's how Knuckles is written.
if you are up on your Sonic comic lore, you know that Ken Penders has never played any of the games.
Yeah.
So
You
things like
actually see parts of the level in this.
yeah, things like
The
Sonic getting the
jokes
bubble,
are snappy.
yeah, and the Sega Genesis controller popping up and Sonic having to grab onto the poles to not be swept away into the water. Like all of that is very Sonic video games esque, and I could kind of see that Kintarovich might have actually played the games. Like I can tell that DeCaesar has watched the shows, and maybe Mike knows the video games. And the reason why they're sticking Mike and Penders together is so they can take one person's ideas and one person's game knowledge and combine them together. Because this,
Because you're gonna need this for this one.
but yeah, this is the first appearance of Knuckles, everyone's favorite character, quote unquote.
The only echidna last of his kind. We swear we're not going to revisit this in the future. There definitely won't be a miniseries that's not so many about Knuckles.
If you know Sonic 3 and you know the general idea of Sonic versus Knuckles, then you already know where this comic is going. It's basically a very truncated version of the third game.
Yeah, it's
And it,
very paint by the numbers. There's even a green emerald in there that looks like the ones from the games.
but it's definitely not the Master Emerald, which, to be fair to both of these writers, Sonic and Knuckles has not been released yet. Sonic and Knuckles is
Yeah.
technically the last third of Sonic 3. And if you didn't know this, Lord, this is very funny. The only reason why Sonic 3 did not launch with the and Knuckles part of the story is because they wanted to get the game out before the McDonald's tie-in toys comes out. So they made sure to release Sonic 3 around when that promotional thing was gonna go. So they released the and Knuckles bit at a reduced market price so they can get a lot of money from McDonald's. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that is so funny. That is
That's
so funny that is why we have a piece of video game history where we have one game inserted into another game that is then inserted into the console.
yeah. And that's where the and Knuckles joke will live and die forever.
So the second half of the storyline, uh, on the second page of the B side, you have actually on like most of the second page, I don't like looking at it. Sally's head is disconnected from her body like 80% of this page, and is just
Well,
hastily redrawn on. And I'm like, it's so weird.
her eyes are I she needs to go and see a doctor. The poor thing. You know, her eyes look like they've been taken over by a parasite in like 3 of these panels. And the only reason why the other 2 panels look fine is because we can't see the other eye.
The Her face looks way too weird and distended in one of the panels. Her head looks too
That's
flat in another. I just don't like this page.
and the other guys look fine. Even Bunny looks fine.
It's only Sally, and Sally looks so weird.
Because in the third page, there's the first panel, right, where they're looking at the massive egg, you know, the death egg, prototype, obviously, where Bunny and Sally are side by side. Sally's eye looks so weird, and Bunny's eye looks so normal.
Honestly, I never even connected the dots that this might have been an allusion to the Death Egg from 3, but since it's in the same issue as Sonic meeting Knuckles for the first time, it does not surprise me. So, the entire
Well, it's a
concept.
massive egg shape in the face of, like, Robotnik with the mustache.
So,
It has to be a death egg proximate.
the concept
Even if
of this.
I think that they were given a mock-up idea of what the death egg looked like, but they hadn't seen it. So they winged it. Just like they winged the proportions on Sally's face. Except for in one of the panels where she almost looks fine at the end of page 3.
So, this whole storyline is that Robotnik is making a spacecraft to go up into space.
Again.
Why? It's probably for reconnaissance purposes, and that's what they're expecting.
It's probably to pollute space. You know,
Oh
he
no, it's
probably
no longer the only place uninfested by capitalism now. Uh uh but
especially since it launches without him.
uh there is one word bubble that ruins the entire this entire storyline for me because it got stuck in my head and I couldn't help but think about it for the last few hours.
Which one?
I feel like we're trapped inside of a giant gumball. And then Sally speaks up and goes, those gumballs are one of the 100 moons that orbit our planet. And I just went, what? What? And it confused me instantly. I double checked what. No, this is to Caesar. Okay. Uh, and I'm like thinking about it, and I'm like, wait a second. They didn't go into
I mean,
space. This is the special dimension. Okay, so
yeah.
if you remember, in Sonic 3, they introduced a new minigame to do to to get the emeralds in the special stages. In Sonic 1, you tilt the entire screen because you're trying to slot Sonic into a goal, and he's just bouncing around on pads. In 2, it's now 3D where you're just running down a pit, and your wipeout style, like dragging Sonic from like left and right uh to avoid traps. This later then gets reused in Sonic Heroes and is much better than the one in Sonic 2. That's just me.
It's also reused in Sonic Lost World too.
But I was looking at this and when someone told them the premise of the of the special stage from Sonic 3, and they extrapolated this because this is just blue orbs. This is where Sonic is running in a line, and you have to jump over bumpers, and you have to make all the red dots. You have to make all the blue dots red, and when you successfully do that, all of the balls like explode out, and then the emerald is there, and you grab it.
And if you hit any of the wrong ones, you just die, and you have to do the whole thing all over again.
Yeah, and it's not like,
Which
oh,
means you have to put new coins in, and you have to completely redo the entire thing.
because it's not just
All the
like, oh,
flashbacks.
I missed an emerald. You have to completely go back to the beginning of the game because you missed one emerald. So now you can't go supersonic at the end of the game. And I'm like,
And
oh.
people miss the 2D Sonic games. I think they miss being kids and their entire world was just those games. I think that that's actually what they miss. Because
So
some of those games are nightmares without save states.
Robotnik tracks them down, turns into a transformer, kicks the
Uh,
egg rocket, which they declare is more like a football. And I completely forgot about this joke, where every single time they go to attack the egg spacecraft, Robotnik puts his hand dramatically over his face, going, "I can't see you hurt my glorious figure." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh!"
it's why he's having Snively do it and not him.
And then they come back to this joke of Sonic trying to make a statue of Antoine. And he does the same thing for Robotnik. It falls on top of him. They get stuck out there. Uh, they leave them to die on a different planet, I guess, and then they go home and just
Well, it's a good
eat pudding.
thing that they're not organics, otherwise they would have died.
Yeah, I give this a high silver. I might have given it a gold, but in context, I kind of don't feel like it. But
Yeah, this one's a silver.
seeing all the video game references really did help with what they were doing, you know?
Yeah, it definitely looked like it had more direction and insight than some of the other comics we've read, and it definitely had more of the same insight as others.
Sonic issue 14 is the lowest we are gonna put a bronze. We are both giving it bronze right off the bat, and we are now going to explain why. Uh, so the first,
Do we want to talk about the plants or do we want to talk about the sexism first?
okay,
Um,
ta- um, so the first storyline is from DeCaesar, in which Tails is helping Rotor. I did like how several times in this comic there are just name tags on Rotor going, no, his name is Rotor. It's because we were going off the concept page for Sat AM, in which his name was Boomer, and then they changed it to Rotor when the full show was released. So now we are confirming His name is Rotor, but his shop is called Boomer's Robotics. Okay?
They
We're just
use his name so often, it's almost like they're trying to remind themselves what his name is.
so Rotor has this greenhouse of plants, and Tails finds a fruit that he thinks is delicious, and he eats it and suddenly becomes smart. Turns out that this was a apple from the Mobian Tree of Wisdom. I don't think this ever comes up, but
Well, they hand wave this and they retcon that this happened.
no, I don't think they ever bring this tree up again, is what I mean. Unless they
Oh.
replant this tree in the atrium of Mobotropolis when they rebuild it, and
I
they
would need to
and
see
they
those
snidely
panels
reference
again
the
to be
fact that it
sure.
might be the same tree. But either way, it's a tree that makes Tails incredibly smart, which is kind of funny because Tails then later goes on in the games, not in
And
not
in
in the
the
comics
comics
yet,
as well.
but in the games he becomes a tech genius, and that becomes his whole character motivation. I honestly think that style of writing Tails comes from this issue. I think this was the start of Tails being the tech guy in Sonic as a series. And if that is true, I'm going to just say DeCesar might actually be one of the most influential Sonic comic story writers, right next to Ken Penders, which is very funny.
It's hilarious to see them like questioning how smart Tails is, and then you look at him in like the newest games, and it's like, yeah, he's a
So,
smart kid.
so there's a great moment
What
where
if?
Tails' intelligence runs out, and Sonic has to go help him. And Sonic rips the medal that he made for that Tails made for himself, and he goes, "This is an innocent-looking medal, yes, but it's actually his new Megaton explosive." And Robotnik goes, "No, it's not." And then Snively goes, I can't read it, sir." Because earlier Tails mentioned that he made the circuitry in such a way that Robotnik can't scan Tails' robots, which comes in importance later when they finally bring things like Nicole, when they start bringing in Tails' robotics and Rotor's inventions as well, that they have a method of creating robots that Robotnik can't track. And and Robotnik is like, "No." And then Sonic holds it above his head about to spike it onto the ground, and Robotnik goes, "Okay, I'm not gonna call your bluff here. I'm gonna let you leave just in case." And it's a great moment where you kind of see Sonic in his prime. I I honestly think, looking back on it
Well,
now,
Sonic is best when he thinks on his feet. If he has to plan stuff, he's like a brick. It's like he just sinks because he's not so good at the planning.
I
He's
honestly
good at the fast thinking and the faster talking.
I think this might honestly be like the nexus point for Sonic and Tails' characters for later on. Because I see so much of adventure era Sonic and Tails in these two characters. And I was like, oh, this might actually be a gold. This might be a gold issue. And then I flipped the page, and it's like, hey guys, here's a do-it-yourself comic. And I go, it's this. This is the issue. So if you don't remember, the way that Ian Flynn got into Sonic is he submitted his version of this make your own comic, and I believe he is later one of the featured comics when they eventually go forward. Either that or
How
they eventually start
old was he when this came out?
like 6 or 7.
Oh, baby Flynn.
Yeah, and so it's like,
Ah,
oh, it's like because now I start thinking
we'll
about it
circle
like,
back to this.
oh, of course Ian Flynn holds this comic in high regard. It's because this is like the nexus point for his version of story writing too.
Well, the first half of it is the nexus point. The following C story is a stone.
Uh, okay, so I'm gonna just word this directly of how it is. Robotnik is pulling out defective marionettes of characters, and the first thing that you see on the page, as your eye focuses onto the first panel, is the little marionette of Sally Acorn selling "Math is hard," and my brain instantly just misfired and went,
It,
"Oh, Ken. Oh,
I
Ken."
wanted to spike this into stone so badly, and then I remembered everything else about this comic, and I'm like, it's holding on by a thread, and so is my patience.
But
Every time he
Robotnik's
does one thing right, he does 15 things wrong.
Robotnik's plan is that he wants to create a situation in which he traps certain members of the Freedom Fighters away from Sonic in which Sonic cannot get to them. So he creates a fake mall for the two girls to fall into, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Robotnik, why? And then there's
No,
this,
no, it's not him. Don't blame the messenger
and
for the message he was sent with.
and
This is not Robotnik's fault. He is
he
being forced to say this.
Robotnik
Robotnik holds Sally in much higher regard than this.
Robotnik has the two girls captured, and the first thing he does is he grabs Sally's face as he's talking down to her. And I went, "Oh, this is like a Ken Penders like extreme moment that you really can't ignore." And of course, the two girls then like start like taking out the robots themselves, and they trap up Snively and Robotnik, and they even reprogram those little marionettes to say more like affirming things. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool. And then they get back, and Sonic is like cutting coupons to get a new game cartridge, and the girls are like, "Isn't it funny how sexism happens?" And it's like they're just walking off, and Sonic's like, "What did I do?" It's like,
He
how
did
did I?
nothing.
And it's like,
Where Sonic caught strays.
and
Oh my
like the
goodness.
ending note might feel like, "Oh, that's funny, feminism for the win." But then you remember that Ken Penders is
No
writing this,
one
and you're like,
won.
"No, no one won on
No
this."
one won. No one won in this one, and it brings down everything else about this issue. And this is a sour note to leave this grouping of issues on when we've had maybe not some bangers, but we've definitely had one or two bangers in this group.
And it's very funny because again, I would put the first half of this issue like pretty highly, but the second issue reminds me of what we're in for, because I was talking to someone. I'm not sure if I was talking to you about this. I reread issue 150. It's one of Ken Pender's
Oh yeah.
worst written issues, in which the entire joke of the storyline is, man, isn't Sonic a chauvinist? And I'm like, no, Sonic isn't a
Ken,
chauvinist. You write him
you're like,
that way.
Ken, how's that glass house that you currently live in?
And then like a few issues later, Sonic and the entire cast of girls are on one mission with each other because
And
basically
doesn't
what
Scourge sleep with like all of them?
yeah, Scourge
He sleeps with
canonically
all of them.
Scourge canonically on that day, when he's pretending to be Sonic, he sleeps with Bunny. He attempts to sleep with Mina, but she's just so weirded out by him that day
Yeah,
that he
she has
doesn't do that.
common sense, and he definitely sleeps with Rouge,
He That is where
which is
Fiona starts
wild.
dating him secretly. And that's when he meets Rouge, which I would hope that Rouge has a little bit more restraint. Uh
No,
but
well, she had to check and see who it was because she knew he was acting off.
yeah, and it's like, but it's like a few issues later, they try to lean in on this like love quadrangle that Ken Penders
Well, it's
has
more than a quadrangle.
in
It
which it's
involves
like,
every
oh,
single character except for Nicole, who is clearly gay and not interested at all.
and then uh it's like, well, Antoine's acting a bit weird. We might start this like thing between like Bunny and Sonic, and everyone just starts shaking their head going, Ken,
Why?
no. And then I remembered that within 10 issues of 150, Ken is no longer on the writing team. And I thought about
I
that and
wonder
went,
what.
that might have been the linchpin. It might have been all the time. Ken just has a problem writing female driven stories. He's really good at writing Sonic. He's really good at
No,
writing sometimes.
he's good at writing Knuckles. Like, when he's motivated, he can write
Yeah.
Sonic, but he can't write Sonic as a character. He can write scenes where Sonic is there, where
So
he
when
happens to be present in the story.
so whenever you open up a comic and you see Ken Pender's name and the first thing that happens is this is going to be a story about the girls, you should immediately run. And again,
Oh, yeah.
it's why I really enjoyed this set of comics because we really got to see all four of the main writers, at least for right now, and we
At
got
the
a very
start of
clear
some of their
description
craft.
and a very clear line about what these writers are good at and bad at. We don't have too much about um I always forget like the first part of his name. One second. Um
Tarovich?
yeah, Kantarovich. Kantarovich.
We're
We don't really
pronouncing it
know.
wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's probably a name in Cyrillic, so it's probably written phonically in English. So it's a bit weird. But we don't really see enough of him through Ken Penders. Like, because, like, Ken Penders
Well,
has
it's
stuff,
because
and
they're
then,
unfortunately stapled at the hip, so it's kind of hard to see between the two when they're both in lockstep. Which is, I think, the only thing saving Penders right now is that he has someone basically chaperoning him through the stories. Because he definitely needs 3 different chaperones at any time.
but yeah, I think that's good. I feel like at the end of the day, one of our major criticisms so far is addressed.
Yeah,
Uh, and
and we will continue to address him as he begins to be the head of the writing staff for the comic.
and
Quite sad.
I kind of I am actually really looking forward to seeing everything leading up to 25
Oh
because I
yeah.
think issue 25 is a very good line in the sand that you start realizing that something is different now with the comics, in which it goes from
Well,
yeah,
it goes from monster of the week, or rather monster of the month, to as I said earlier, Game of Thrones with furries.
yeah, and I think there isn't really too much for us to say.
Yeah.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Uh, we'll see you all next time, everybody.
See you next time for hopefully bad bad written female characters, but wouldn't hold hopes up for some of these issues coming up. Although someone is going to get a new paint job.
See everyone later. Goodbye.
See you. Bye.